Brad Poole here, new market director for Encore Networks. This is the second video in our how-to series for InCloud and Insight. Today we're going to cover manually adding devices to InCloud. We'll touch on the following 5 points. When to add devices to InCloud, where to add devices, who can add devices, and then adding a single device or adding bulk devices using either the CSV or manually line by line. For most users, it'll not be necessary to manually add devices to InCloud. Encore preloads devices as they leave the factory for companies with InCloud subscriptions. This means that new devices ordered from InCloud will show up in the device list automatically. That means that devices will only need to be added to InCloud in the following situations. 1. If you have devices that you bought prior to purchasing InCloud. Or 2, if you bought devices from someone other than Encore Networks, like a reseller or a VAR. In both cases, the devices may not have been loaded into InCloud or associated with your account. The third situation is Insight users. Insight users are always going to have to manually add their devices because Encore will have no access to the local Insight server. To begin adding devices to InCloud or Insight, you have to have a user account with admin access to the Tier 1 device list. On the Devices tab, there's 2 options for adding devices, either individually using the Add Single Device button, or in bulk using the Add Bulk Devices button. These buttons function the same whether you're in Insight or InCloud, but we'll start by adding a single device. There are only 3 required fields when loading a device. They're the name, the device UID, and the hardware profile. The rest of the fields are optional, but they may make sense for you to include. Starting at the top, the name field is a string field that has no restrictions. The same is true for the description field. The UID, though, is also a string field, but the device UID is the unique identifier of the device, so therefore it needs to be input correctly. The UID is the LAN MAC address on Encore devices. The LAN MAC address is generally found printed on the sticker on the bottom of the device, or can be found on the status screen of the device interface. The UID should be entered in all caps with no colons. The UID will be, in most cases, will begin with 00A0EB. This must be entered correctly or the device activation will fail. Next is the hardware profile. It's important you select the proper hardware profile or else the device will not check in properly. The device identifier identifies what hardware model is being added to InCloud. And the hardware profile also identifies which parameters apply to the device and are tracked in InCloud. Getting this right is required for devices to be able to check into InCloud or Insight correctly. The other fields are optional, including the address and the SIM IDs. The SIM fields will be overwritten by the SIM that's actually put into the device when the device checks in for the first time. But if you have the SIM ID at this point and want to type it in, you can go ahead and do so. You can select a configuration to be preloaded on the device as well when it first checks in, if there are some available. The Tier 1 VAR field will be pre-populated with the VAR to which you belong, so sample VAR is selected here. You can then select the Tier 2 customer field, which will be pre-populated with the customers available for your VAR, and you can select one. You don't have to select one, though. We'll use your company. And then the Tier 3 group will be populated with the groups available within the Tier 2 selection. So we'll pick Deployment Group 1. You can then select a class of service because you're adding it to a Tier 2, so you have to pick a subscription. So you can pick the 30-day subscription here. Then you agree to the terms, and you can either activate or not activate the device based on your preference. When you're done, click the Add Device button. The device will now show up in your Tier 1 device list with the assignments that you chose for it. Next, we'll add multiple devices using the Add Bulk Devices button. On the Add Bulk Devices dialog, you have the same options as on the Add Single Device dialog. The Tier 1 VAR assignment will default to your own Tier 1 VAR, And you can then choose a Tier 2 customer as well as a Tier 3 deployment group. Keep in mind that when you add a device to a Tier 2 customer, you have to select a subscription type. When adding multiple devices, there must be enough subscriptions for all the devices you're adding, and the same subscription type will be added to all the devices. If you don't have enough of the subscription type you need, or you want to assign different subscriptions to each of the devices, then add them without a customer assignment. That way, you can assign the proper subscription to each device when you assign it to a customer from the device list. There are two ways to enter your list of devices. The first is to use a CSV file, the format for which you can find here on the Info tab, little info bubble. Here's an example. You can also click the Change Type slider and enter your devices line by line. The same information is in both the CSV or the line by line method. It's the name, the device UID, and the hardware profile. In our example CSV file, you can see the model, UID, and name. To load a CSV file, simply click Browse, select the demo file you want, and then click Add Bulk Devices. Because we didn't select any Tier 2 or Tier 3 assignments, these devices show up unassigned in the device list. If you want to enter devices using the manual line by line method, simply add the device name, give it a UID, and select its hardware profile. You can add new rows as you like, or you can remove rows. If you click Add Bulk Devices, these two will be added into the list. Keep in mind that UIDs are unique and cannot be repeated. If you make a mistake and try to add a device that already exists into EN Cloud, an error message will appear. Additionally, if you add a device to the wrong hardware profile, say for instance you add an EN2000 device to an EN1000 profile, an error will appear on the device itself when it tries to check in to EN Cloud. Once the devices are in the device list, you can then assign them to a Tier 2 or a Tier 3 customer using the same process we did in our very first video about account setup. This is how you add devices to EN Cloud and Insight. We covered adding devices singly or in bulk. So for information about subscriptions and assigning devices to customers and groups, see the first video in our series. In our next video, we'll cover how to track cellular data and create data plans. This has been Brad Poole for Encore Networks. We hope this video has been helpful, and for more information about EN Cloud, watch the other videos in this series or visit us on our webpage at encorenetworks.com.